I have one more thing I want to cover before I move into doing some video game stuff, and it's a channel I've never covered before. It's a channel called Mentis Wave, and they made a video called Debunking the Transitioning Kids versus Puberty Argument. Okay, I'm interested to see what happens here. I'm interested to see how this goes. So let's go ahead and take a look.
This video is just going to be quickly settling the debate on a common argument you might have seen going around about protecting trans youth.
I like the... Is arrogance the word for it? Like, my word is the word that's going to settle the debate? I don't know. There's definitely a confidence to it, though.
Specifically about whether or not kids should be allowed to transition. A common argument that comes up is surrounding this comic. One side says, stop imposing irreversible changes onto kids, obviously representing the side of the argument that children should not be allowed to transition because certain gender-confirming procedures like mastectomies, for example, can't really be reversed. And the response is basically, oh,
Like what? Did you say vasectomies?
Like mastectomies, for example.
Oh, vasectomies, not vasectomies. Who's performing those on kids? Where's that happening?
Can't really be reversed. And the response is basically, oh, irreversible changes. You mean like puberty? Coming from the pink bird, obviously representing the side saying that children should be allowed to transition. And so the point of...
Okay, so I feel like... I haven't seen this video yet, but I feel like when you say the phrase children transitioning, you need to define that phrase. So like, what does that mean? Because transitioning takes place in several stages. If we're talking about the regular way that we do the whole transitioning cycle for most youth, if we're engaged in it at all, because it's shockingly rare, then what you have is a first stage of social transition. This is a stage where people have their, you know, if they're a boy, maybe you let them wear a dress. If they're a girl, maybe you let them wear more androgynous or more masculine clothes. I mean, the idea of masculine clothes has kind of died out a little bit because that's been kind of reclaimed everywhere. But you allow those bits of social transition to happen. Try on a different name, try on a different set of clothes. And we engage in that bit of behavior, not for a small amount of time. Like, that is something that is done for years to see if that different identity is one that sticks, if that one is safe to be in. And I'm not trying to say this from, like, a hip fire thing. I am trying to say this from the side of actual professional psychology when it comes to transitioning. When we get to puberty, and not a moment before, when we get to the moment that a child has engaged in puberty, so usually 10, 12, 14, once puberty has started, that is when you can induce puberty blockers. You cannot induce puberty blockers before then. As for puberty blockers, how long do we do puberty blockers? Well, we do them about 5 years. You can be on puberty blockers about 5 years. So let me ask you a question. If somebody hits puberty at 12, 13, 14, and they're on puberty blockers for 5 years, what the fuck are they at the end of that 5 years? Usually an adult. Usually they are either older than the age you would be able to be to drive a car and kill a person in the fucking street on accident, or you're just an adult. And only at that point do we allow hormone therapy. We generally do not allow it before that point. And then after 1 to 2 years of hormone therapy, only then can you start looking at surgeries. Now, I wonder if Mentis Wave is going to go into any of that nuance. I've gone ahead and done so, and you can look up the stats for yourself if you want to prove me wrong. Go ahead.
The comic is that it's trying to say that, hey, puberty also brings with it irreversible changes, and so if you are, say, using age of consent or something like that as an argument to prevent kids from being allowed to transition, and they grow up, and they still want to transition, then their transition will not go as well or be as effective due to biological changes, etc., that happen throughout puberty. And thus, it's the same thing. And I see a lot of people...
It's not really the same thing. Like, I think anybody arguing that a natural puberty and the equally natural but certainly more planned puberty that happens when you have hormone therapy, I think that anybody trying to say those are the same thing is being disingenuous, but they're not trying to rest their entire argument on that. It's trying to get you, as an interlocutor, to change your tact. Because if you're going to use the phrase irreversible changes, then surely you should accept that there are other ways that irreversible changes can happen that need to be addressed. And it turns out the natural end result of this that experts agree on is that you just use puberty blockers. The irreversible changes start happening in puberty. And so you just do puberty blockers. You buy time for that. That's what studies have shown has a high rate of success when it comes to people being happy and healthy with themselves. Because I'm not defining success as the chances that you'll become like a beautiful fucking trans butterfly. No, I'm arguing success as people who have better mental health outcomes. Those mental health outcomes are almost always better when we let people engage in gender-affirming care. And that gender-affirming care is not just cutting people up as fucking kids. That doesn't fucking happen. But okay, let's continue.
Getting tripped up by this argument. Because the common response will be something like, oh, well, that's a false equivalence because puberty is a natural process and transitioning goes against the body's natural biology or something like that. At which point the pro-transing kids side will just say, oh, that's just a naturalistic fallacy.
Okay, it is a naturalistic fallacy. It is. But why are you calling it the pro-transing kid side? I feel like when you use that kind of loaded language and you don't actually talk about what that statement means, you leave a lot of gray area for people to insert what they think you mean by it.
And the thing is, they're kind of half correct when they say that. It is indeed absolutely a fallacy to assume that something is better just because it is natural. If you push that to its logical conclusion, you could say very insane things like saying, oh, death is natural, therefore the very practice of medicine should be abolished, which is of course completely absurd. You see, you have to understand that this argument isn't quite as bad as it first seems. It's still bad, but it's not so bad that it's completely false. In fact, in an alternative reality, it could even be seen as an acceptable argument. Allow me to explain.
Is it an alternate reality, or is it just the reality we currently live in? Because, like, here's the thing. I used to try to ground everything I did and said in, like, the laws of logic and shit. Like, y'all remember during my first 2 years of my time on my channel where I took myself way more seriously and operated more as a, like, r/atheist Philosobro back during that time. Any of you who've been watching me for that long, God fucking help you if you did. But that was where I was at. I tried to do everything that way. Now I tend to be more, I don't care if it's logically inconsistent if the studies back up that that's the thing that is the right thing to do. If the outcomes from data, from using proper source methods, are better for the people involved, I care not for how you plan to philosophize it. There was a time where I'd be like, well, Wittgenstein said that a chair is whatever you defined it as. I don't give a shit about that anymore.
You see, the actual error in reasoning that this take is guilty of isn't so much false equivalence, but rather it's an error of equivocation, in that they're equivocating between what transgenderists usually complain about all the
Transgenderists? This feels like a lot of really loaded language, my guy. Do you know how to communicate in any way that does not, like, signal that there is an enemy here?
the time, which is there being a difference between sex and gender, with them making a very strong point on there being a difference between gender identity and the biology that the person actually has. So for instance, say we hypothetically lived in a far more medically advanced society. One so advanced that from today's perspective from medical science, it would basically be like magic. And so in this society, they've completely mastered the human body, and thus the genetics and composition of it can be easily changed on the fly. And so in this highly advanced society, those who are trans, well, they can just go down to their pharmacy and request a simple genome sexual reassignment pill. And they take the pill and they wake up the next morning and they're completely switched to the opposite sex. Secondary sex characteristics.
I feel like both of those things were AI generated. I don't know if that was. I don't know if that is. But anytime I see, like, anything AI related now, it just feels icky to me.
XX to XY, XY to XX, in terms of chromosomes, with full reproductive capability of the opposite sex. In other words, they wake up as if they had been born that way, even including things like differences in height and width of hips, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. So we're talking a full and complete true biological transition here. And of course, you could take the opposite pill and switch back. It would be a very easy thing to do. Switching between male and female and back in this hypothetical advanced society would most likely not be seen as that much different from treating any other chronic disorder. And the thing is, in this hypothetical society, the argument that this comic makes would actually make sense. And why would that be? Well, there's two reasons. The first and most important one is that it's no longer a question of reversibility. Because of course, in this highly advanced society, both puberty and transitioning would be equally reversible. So the entire point doesn't really matter. But another more interesting and more key reason here, this is the one that I think a lot of people are missing, is that in this hypothetical advanced society where you can just take a pill and swap biological male-female, the difference between gender identity and biological sex, well, it would kind of effectively not really matter. The culture of this society would most likely not really care for there to be any kind of important distinction between the two, because you could just, again, take a pill and it's not really a big deal.
I mean, I can kind of agree with that. I actually can kind of agree with that. In a world where we have like the perfect ability to engage in the human character creator, then we would have no reason to have these distinctions, except for the fact that you would still want to have the distinction so that you knew like why you were engaging in the transitioning for the first place. But even then, like if somebody just wanted to try on being trans just to see if it felt good, like they could just do that. I'm sure you've probably read a hentai or two where that happened. Isn't like gender swapping just an entire fucking doujin tag now? It's like the all the way through tag or the NTR tag. You just stumble upon it sometimes. Bragwin says, because it can't be done perfectly, it shouldn't be attempted. I don't think he's made his point yet, so I'm going to withhold judgment until he does.
People who are trans would just take the pill and then their biology would match their identity and then they could just get on with their life. It's very likely that if this pill exists, people would just kind of stop caring about it, and it wouldn't even really be a political discussion at all. This is why I've said before in one of my QA videos, when somebody asked me how I feel about the transgender community, my basic answer is that I genuinely feel a little bit sorry for them. Because the thing is, if you understand transgenderism, if you understand
there's the words, transgenderism is treating it all as an ideology when it's not.
Psychology of the people who are genuinely trans and not just a trender, you'll start to realize as you look into it and how they live their lives that most trans people would really just give anything for that pill to exist. A lot of them would just freaking sell their souls for that pill to exist. They would love to live in this hypothetical society. If you read through things like various trans...
Kazooie says, a trender, yeah, so there is a type of person who does exist. They do exist. They are, again, shockingly small, but there is a type of person who wears trans identity because it is trendy. I do not think there are that many of these people, and I think there are even fewer of those people now that we live in the Trump administration, where, quite frankly, it is just far more socially acceptable to not be trans. The movement as an apparatus has much less momentum right now than it did even during Trump's first presidency. So whether or not trenders exist, I think that there's a non-zero chance that they do, because if you can perceive of a type of person, that type of person is fucking somewhere. I also think that that type of person is so glaringly small as like a representation of that population of people that talking about them is not useful in any way, right? It's like... you find a group of people and there's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of that group of people that are like super loud and super problematic, and you always have to make the argument that that group of people doesn't represent the whole. I feel like with trenders, that's the same thing in general. The problem with using the term transtrender, though, the biggest problem with using it is that irrespective of how many people exist who fit that bill, once you've introduced the idea of the transtrender to somebody who is anti-trans, it kind of opens the door for them to call anybody that they don't like a transtrender. Like, I was at a convention, and I was introduced to the friend of a friend who was, by all definition, the most masculine male you could see. Heavy built, stocky frame, big fucking beard. but they were introduced as a she. So as far as I know, that person believes that they are a she. I have no way to identify whether she is or doesn't. I have no way of ascertaining what's in their head. I have no way of knowing what's in her head at all. However, because the notion of the transgender exists, you give that same person to a conservative, and they're automatically going to assume that they do know what's in that person's head. And that's my problem.
Subreddits and such, you'll see a lot of them are often complaining about how, or wishing that there would be some kind of magic solution to their problem. That they could just press a magic button and presto, they're magically the opposite sex. And why is it so many people of the trans community feel this way? Well, it's pretty simple, really. Because unfortunately for them, the current options for transitioning aren't very good. In reality, our current day medical science is nowhere near being capable of making that pill exist. In fact, I use the word magic because it's important to emphasize the massive canyon of difference between that hypothetical level of medical science and our current level of medical science.
I'm sorry, but I hate to be the stickler in the mud here, but do you feel like maybe there are some aspects about femininity and masculinity that are arbitrary, like breedability? I feel like that's arbitrary because we consider, at least, in non-hyper Seven Mountain conservative circles, we consider women who are barren to still be women. We consider women who have had to engage in surgeries because they've got like PCOS and shit, and therefore are now infertile. We still consider them women. We still consider them women in no uncertain terms. Again, you have to find like the weird fringe people who start considering them not women. So I feel like aspects like, can they bear children? Do they got the childbearing hips? I feel like none of that really matters because there's a lot of cis women who don't have those either, and their femininity is not taken away from them in any meaningful way. I feel like and I know this is going to sound kind of medicalist. I recognize that and I'm just going to preempt that with, feel free to tell me in the comments section how bad I'm being about this. I understand your concern, but let us consider for a moment that if a trans woman or a trans man wakes up in society today and they are treated like a man or a woman, they are treated like the gender that they say that they are, and they look the part, in reality, in our actual lived reality, they go through society in an infinitely more frictionless way. Now, there are aspects of society that are invisible to a lot of people that they still have to deal with. So, for instance, if you're trans, you may have to fight harder to get your hormones right now because the Trump administration is cracking down on that shit for stupid fucking reasons, because they have non-doctors in charge of fucking health organizations. There are invisible aspects of society that are still a struggle to deal with. But in reality right now, I can give you a couple of examples. I have a friend who's a trans man. Known this person for years. When he goes outside, everybody views him as a man. He's got facial hair, stocky build, everything. The only people who know that he's trans are people online, because he's in online spaces, and people who are close friends of his. But when he goes out to the store, everything, he just is treated like a man. That's it. I've never witnessed this person treated any other way. Conversely, I'm dating a trans woman. There's really been no parts of my experience with my current partner, who I've had for 3 years, that feel that much different than my experiences with cis women. There's some uniqueness to it. For instance, there's a medication she has to take every week in order to maintain her hormone levels because she doesn't produce male hormones anymore. So that's something that she has to do. But that's no different than the experience of being with somebody who's a diabetic, for instance. They have to take an injection. And the older you get, the more likely you are to need an injection or a pill or anything like that. So if my experience with this person and their experience as themselves are the experiences of being a woman or being with a woman, when I go out and I'm with my family, none of them know she's trans and everybody treats her like a woman. Hell, my mom, when she was on her weight loss journey, she sized out of a bunch of clothes and just passed them down to Saki. And was just like, here, I do not fit these anymore. You can have them. And Saki, even though she is slender, she's still almost fucking foot taller than me. So she's got a more filled out frame from being fucking taller, so some of those clothes just fit better. So if the lived experience, if the way that people are being treated is identical to cis people in every meaningful way, what's the actual issue? Obviously, we can get medical science to be better and be more specific about the things that it's changing, but if so many of the lived experiences of these people are just, after a certain point, damn near identical to the cis counterparts for their gender, I don't see where the argument could possibly go that, like, we don't live in the hyper-magical society yet, so I get to treat you like the gender you're not. I don't see where that's coming from. Now, granted, he has not yet made that argument, so let's see what he does.
And not only are we nowhere near to being able to make that pill exist, we have no real way of knowing even how such a pill could exist or how it would even function if it would exist.
But we do know that one of the main factors that determines how one is presented phenotypically and even how one thinks about things are hormonal balances. And we know that through hormone therapy, we can affect those hormonal balances and get people to within a sliver of what would be the considered like the normal hormonal balance for a cis person of the same gender. So I failed to see the problem. Like, for every person that tries to say, like, oh, it's not enough. Okay, cool. You and I agree that medical science has more ways to go. But have you seen what phalloplasty and vaginoplasty looked like 20 years ago? Because I promise you most people haven't looked into that. But I have. I have. And the reason I have is because that's something that my partner is very interested in getting. That is something that she is actively trying to pursue. She wants to have bottom surgery. And I want her to have it because that is something that she really, really wants and feels she needs. Cool. I'm not in her head. I have no way to dictate any of that. So, looking at how these procedures were performed years ago, they have been refined far better than what they were years ago. What's to say we're not going to continue to refine these procedures into the future? What's to say we're not going to get to that point? Sure, we don't know how to do it yet, but I don't see that as any kind of argument in any way at all. Also, how's it going, progress only? Thank you for the raid.
Based on our current understanding, it is medically impossible to change your biology this way. And so,
okay, but there's the loaded language. Change your biology this way. But that's not what's necessary. What's necessary is not having a bunch of arbitrary boxes about how the biology is changed. What's necessary is figuring out which boxes need to be ticked and figure out how we can handle that. So, like, I could look up a picture of any random fucking trans woman who passes, right? I can do that. I can look up, what's the easiest one is always going to be Blair White, but I feel like fewer people know this one, and she actually is a fucking cool-ass person. And I've talked to her about Sonic the Hedgehog before. So that's also wild to me. But I'm just going to throw up there, this is Stacey K. This is Stacey K. Stacey K is a comedian, and she is a wonderful person. I hung out with her in New York when we were doing the campaign for Jamal Bowman. Do you want to know a wild experience for me? There's a picture on the internet, on Twitter, that got well over 1 million views in like 24 hours. And that picture is one that we took as a group. Me, Stacey K, Riverboat Jack, Alec Gunter, Vosh. I'm not name dropping because I think it's cool to be around these people. I do think it's cool to be around these people. But I'm name dropping because there's a reason this picture went viral. Picture went viral, and in the comments section of this picture, there were so many fucking right-wing accounts that were thirsting over Stacey. Stacey is a model. She's a very attractive woman. I will never deny that. But seeing the absolute fucking cartoonish hound dogs in these Twitter replies, and half the time, the first response from somebody was like, you know that's a dude, right? And no, she's not. She's a trans woman, though. My question, one who reads says being around Vosh is not cool. I don't give a shit what your opinion is on Vosh. I don't care. I've actually hung out with the guy. I've actually had private conversations with the guy. I have my opinion. Randos on the internet having opinions about another person is not going to change my opinion on them. That said, watching so many people having these weird fucking thirsty comments about her, how is that any different than just being an attractive cis woman and having many people randomly have these comments about you as well? Like, if you're a cis woman and you're having this experience, like, you're just having the same fucking experience. Sure, there's a different layer onto it where some of those conservatives will pretend to freak out when they find out you're trans, and then they'll desperately try to look up your OnlyFans if you have one, or even worse, use Grok to AI generate porn of you. That shit has been happening to one of my friends on the internet, and I'm not happy about that. The person who does a lot of the artwork for my Magic the Gathering channel has been just getting generated lately, and it's gross as fuck. That says that's fucked. It is fucked. It is fucked. But that friend is biologically a woman. So that experience is happening to both people I know who are trans women on the internet and people I know who aren't. Wondery says they pretend to not know. I mean, some of them might. There are a non-zero amount of them who might legitimately know that Stacey K is trans and are still attracted to her. Hell, again, I think she's very attractive. But I think there's also a solid amount of people who just cannot tell. Because that's been my experience living in Georgia. There is nowhere that I go in the Georgia South where my girlfriend has been harassed when we go to dinner, when we go to the gym, when we go out to the park and play Pokemon Go, when we've gone bicycle riding, scooter riding, to damn near anywhere we've gone. Even areas that have like designated segregated spaces, like going to the gym where you've got the girls' locker room and the guys' locker room, there's never any fucking friction. So what experience is so fundamental that's not being had, and why is that experience necessary? Because if there's experiences that cis women can have that are not universal, then why does it matter? I feel like we have this arbitrary set of definitions for what we say the genders are, and that's what we fight for as hard as we possibly can. But again, if the way that people are experiencing their lives are indistinguishable, why does it matter? Trace James says, my brain is having trouble conceptualizing Blair White as being trans and a transphobe. Yeah, there's a word for that. The common word for it is pick-me, but the less common word for it is quisling. Have fun looking up quisling, and you'll know what Blair White is.
So the options that a transgender individual has are fairly limited. Either A, they can try and just cope with it. They can just try to learn to accept their biology as their gender and live as that. And there's even some drugs out there that allegedly can help them do this to thus reduce their feelings of dysphoria, or body or gender dysphoria as it's sometimes called, which is basically the feeling of unrest and anxiety.
What drugs are you talking about? Do you want to go into detail, or like, are you just going to throw that out there randomly? Like, just saying that there are drugs out there that make people feel less dysphoric and never detail it at all. Are you talking about hormone replacement therapy? Or are you talking about some other magic pill that I don't know of? I need you to be specific, my guy.
And dissatisfaction with their own body. And then, of course, the other option is to transition, doing things like HRT, hormone replacement therapy, or gender confirmation surgeries, various supplements, puberty blockers, and other various drugs and cosmetic surgeries to kind of make them look like their preferred gender in terms of biology.
To kind of make them look like... My guy, for the first 2 years that I knew that Saki existed, I did not know she was trans. During the first year that I knew she existed, I raided her on Twitch, and then saw her Twitter account where she posted very provocative photos of herself, and went, that's a really attractive, cute person. Neat. It wasn't until I was single for a year that the idea of trying to maybe pursue something other than just a tepid friendship with this person ever even crossed my mind as a possibility. But then it did happen. And it was after we had already started dating that I found out she was trans. And that was a whole conversation. And you know what? I'm happier for it. I've come to the conclusion that I simply don't give a shit what's going on down there. If the person looks female to me, and the person identifies as female, I don't give a shit. I am attracted to that person. Neato. Easiest shit in the world. So, if you're gonna go and do this like, they kinda, I'm sorry, but my experience is there are cis women who get harassed as if they are trans women and kicked out of Walmart bathrooms, and there are trans women who get lusted over the same way that cis women do by supposedly straight men who have opinions on what makes them straight and those opinions end at person is trans. Cyberchill says Suris is demi-confirmed. Cyberchill, that's been confirmed for 5 years. It's just been me figuring out what my relationship is with that orientation that's changed.
But of course, the problem is that they don't really succeed. If someone is very lucky...
Are you saying that trans people don't succeed at passing? Yeah, there are some cis people who don't succeed at passing. I don't see that as an argument.
They'll end up passing, but a lot of times, especially when it comes to MTFs or male to female, a lot of them, sad to say, just being honest, they don't really pass. And this, of course...
You're right. A lot of them don't. So now you have the option of sympathizing with that person and trying to do what you can to make their life better for them, or just being an asshole on the internet. Which angle are you going for?
Of course, it's because the current options for medically transitioning don't really change your biological sex. In terms of biology, they more or less make you something in between. And so, of course, in our society...
Wait, they make you something in between? How? How do they make you something in between? You need to explain that one as well. Do you have a source for that one? Because, like, that sounds like you're saying that taking hormone therapy makes you intersex? I don't think that that's what they do, my guy.
The trans community has made a big emphasis on there being a major difference between whether or not your biology is male or female and how a person identifies in terms of their gender representation.
I mean, we've literally done studies on trans cadavers and found that the cadavers that identified as female but had been born male had the gray matter versus white matter biological makeup in the brain that was more associated with people who were female, regardless of how they were born. So I don't know what you're getting at, my guy.
On whether or not they are male or female. And now whether or not that's valid is a completely different discussion altogether. Whipping back to the point made in this comic, we can now see a very big issue. Because puberty is a biological process, not a gender identity process.
It is a biological process, and like with all biological processes, we should scrutinize that process if it does not lead to the happiness or thriving of the individual involved.
And so the point being made here is effectively equivocating and walking back on that important distinction between, again, biology and identity. And so the discussion here really shouldn't be about natural versus unnatural. The real problem here is functioning and non-functioning, because we do not live in a world where medical science is capable of making the full and true biological change that trans people would prefer to have. Medically transitioning does not result in functioning reproductive ability.
Why is reproductive ability... Why is that a factor? Barren cis women exist. Your argument is not sound.
As puberty does, because puberty is a biological thing, not an identity thing. And so thus, in addition to being an equivocation, the really big problem with the argument this comic is trying to make is that it's a distraction from the real, more important question, which is whether or not a child is mature enough to make a decision that will ultimately result in them either being sterile due to not having functional reproductive organs, or other various medical problems that comes with transitioning.
You know what's funny? I'm going to throw this at you real quick. Just real quick. So you know that people who have late onset puberty still can have children, and that people who go under puberty blockers see all the same biological functions as people who go through late onset puberty. Moreover, did you know that only up until recently, like within the last 2 years, in Finland, for you to have your gender marker changed, you needed to be chemically castrated, you need to be sterilized by the state in order to have your gender marker changed if you were trans, because they didn't want you breeding if you were trans. So, my question is, why would any state need to go through that particular process if the transitioning process made you infertile? If a state had to do one of the stages of genocide in order to allow you to do the legal transitioning in the first fucking place, a thing that supposedly I've heard a lot of right-wingers argue happens anyway. Because he says, I need to ask this, why are transphobes always super obsessed with breeding? Yeah, I don't understand. Whether or not this person's a transphobe, don't know. Don't really care. The argument itself doesn't really have any salience, because we don't see breedability as the guaranteed women thing. Women are more than their wombs. They have more experiences than just that. This is like people who go, trans women will never experience a period. They may experience cramps because of hormones hormone imbalances that are very close to periods, and they may have them at the same cycle sometimes as cis women do, but they'll never have the bleeding part. So gotcha, liberal. And then they go through menopause, and I guess now they're just not a fucking woman anymore because they're not experiencing any of it anymore. Like, I thought that function was so notoriously importantly woman. Jesus Christ. I don't know. This doesn't seem like a thought that is... It seems like this is the kind of thing that somebody sits in the shower and thinks about and then goes, I've come to the conclusion. The problem is not that it's a good point. That doesn't matter. If I just avoid that entirely, I can argue instead that the problem is that we haven't reached the super powerful magical medical science point that we need to so that trans women can be bred. And because I cannot put my wee-wee in trans woman and make a baby pop out, that's not a real woman. I am very smart. Okay.
Like, for example, as mentioned, puberty blockers, which can cause permanent negative effects to bone density, brain development, adult height, or partially permanent in that they can regain some of the function, but not all of the biological changes they would have gone through without the blockers.
You're right. A thing that can happen. Now, how often does that happen? Because, like with people who have questions about COVID vaccines, the question is not, does a medication have no side effects? All medications have side effects. Every single medication on the planet that does anything beneficial for the body has some side effect, some trade-off somewhere. You take too much ibuprofen, your blood gets thin. You take too much acetaminophen, your liver shuts down. And yet, both of those are still on the market right now. According to Donald Trump, you take too much of it and you turn into a fucking autist and you start liking trains and Magic the Gathering cards, but that's neither here nor there. So instead, I will say, maybe if you want this to be taken more seriously by people who have read medical text on puberty blockers, see if it is so statistically significant that these things will happen, and if that is not considered a beneficial trade-off by the scientific community at large, whose job it is to analyze these things. There is a reason that these medications are used when they are used. It is because, unlike you or I, experts in the field have deemed them safe enough for general use under supervision of a medical professional. As you are not a medical professional, and I am not a medical professional, then I believe you and I should both stop pretending this conversation should happen in the oh-so-important, self-important world of Philosopros, and instead happen in the world of experts in the field who have peer-reviewed studies on the matter. And those people don't agree with you. And I agree with those people. That's where I think the real crux of this ends up being. A lot of Philosobros on the internet, also Femboy Feet Kisser, thank you for the follow, but a lot of Philosobros will try to philosophize this, like, what is the true essence of women that we can or can't get to with our medical makeup today, or they'll try to philosophize whether the identity matters at all, and I just don't think any of that is interesting anymore. I think those conversations go so far into left field, and they stick so far into the weeds that it's not useful for anybody. I think it's far more interesting. I'm gonna do the same thing that he did. I think it's far more interesting and far more useful to see what the experts in the field are saying about hormone blockers, what they're saying about transitioning, what they're saying about hormones, what they're saying about these surgeries, how they are arguing they should be implemented. And let's go with what the experts say should be done. I do not believe shower thoughts should lead to the death of expertise. But apparently, there is a contingent of people on the internet that believe that shower thoughts should be a perfectly viable method to lead to the death of expertise. I simply find that a repugnant idea. I like data. I like stats. I like hard evidence. I don't like sitting here and trying to reason my way to not believing that medications that experts have already done a fuck ton of studies on do what those studies suggest they do. Jesus Christ. Anyway, that's all for that one. I will say, in my estimation, the bent of the video was definitely very much in the realm of, like, the very, very Philosobro style stuff that I just don't engage with anymore. But I think the video was not the worst thing in the world. I've seen very, very transphobic arguments against trans people, and this one seemed like it tried to be rooted as close as it could to the brass tacks of the situation. Now, granted, There was a lot of loaded language used in the beginning. That loaded language being things like the transgender movement, transgenderism, the people who are okay with transing kids. Like, a lot of that stuff was used really, really early on in the video, and that definitely raises my red flags. And of course, the conclusion of the video, not caring what experts think, and instead cares what the shower thoughts are, also, I really don't think matters much. Jassa, I do agree. I think you should just watch Sex and Sensibilities. Like, Forrest Valkai's video is like the video from the guy who has studied this for the purpose of arguing it from the position of expertise. I think that Forrest Valkai's video on this is like the video to watch more than anything. Maybe I should just make a video called just Watch Sex and Sensibilities by Forrest Valkai. Ignore his opinions on cats. He is wrong about cats. He's fucking wrong about cats, but he's right about gender. That said, that's where I get. Hopefully I was as fair and even-handed about this as I possibly could be. I feel like I addressed basically every point that he brought up in as good a fashion as I could. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. And hell, subscribe if you haven't already. Maybe consider following. Maybe consider checking out my other channels. I got a Magic the Gathering channel. I've got a news channel. Maybe come check those out as well and see what I've got going on there. That said, thank you very much for watching, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, you made it to the end. I want to give an extra thanks to the patrons who allow me to do this full time. I want to thank Aaron Rail, Astral, Britzkrieg, Jemshin, Poundini, Red Joker, Victoria, Jonas, Craig, Tarika, Fireshard, Smiling GM, John, Dren Hadamada, Creeper, Sagitta, you know I'm not saying that last part, Valis of Seraph, Ottoman Angel, Rooster Rachel, and Fire Panda, who are all my $20 and up patrons.